hear that, okay, we don't want restaurants to go back to 25%, they won't be as successful, but it's a best case scenario of May 12th. What's a best case scenario for me as a gym owner, or as a salon owner, or as a barbershop owner? What if I can hear restaurants are going to have more than 25% capacity?
We're live right now. We've got a question about whether gyms are opening or not, so we're just going to stick with
it's a good
Governor
question.
Ducey
I don't know
here
if
for a
everyone
minute.
heard it, but the question was specifically around gyms, and I gave a best case scenario for dine-in with social distancing of May 12th. What's a best case scenario for gyms, salons, barbershops? We're working with all these industries. I mean, we think of all of these things. There was an order that was put out earlier, some time ago, around essential services. Well,
Like a gym.
anybody that has a job sees that job as essential, especially if it's what feeds their family. And eventually we're going to turn that dial and bring, full light and energy to our economy.
What's the answer, man?
The businesses that you're listing of gyms and barbershops and salons are all part of it. So we are working with those industries. And if you look or think of it from the places where smaller numbers congregate to larger numbers congregate, though that will likely be how the decisions are made, along with seeing reinforcing trends within the guidance. I think you can kind of see how we can get there. I'm hopeful for the month of May. I think May can be a very positive month.
There
Again,
we go.
I'd rather under-promise and over-deliver.
All right, that's about enough of Governor Ducey. Governor Ducey today just extended the stay-at-home order until May 15th. We've got the actual copies of the order that I want to share with you. We're sort of expecting this. I don't think this was anything out of the ordinary. There was some pretty big momentum from a lot of the different mayors throughout Arizona who were saying that they wanted this to continue to go forward. I know that Senator Sinema had said that she wanted it also extended. And so Governor Ducey is kind of, I think, splitting down the middle. He's doing something where there's sort of a slow loosening of the grip of the government over small business and over big business and over everybody in a lot of ways. So it looks like they're going to continue to loosen things up. I have not read the order with a very fine detail because it just came out. And this is something that I was joking about last week, that Governor Ducey is constantly trying to preempt our show. We do our show prep and get ready to have a great broadcast here. And then his press conferences just sort of extend right into our show, which is, the governor has to do what the governor has to do. I guess we'll allow it. But here's a little excerpt from the order. Just wanted to show you quickly. Here's what it looks like. Arizona. So it's basically the same order. Stay home, stay healthy, stay connected. And then the governor signed off on it. It's going to be in effect until May 15th, 2020 at 11:59 unless modified. So basically, this builds on actions that the state has already taken and further memorializes some already in effect to slow the spread of COVID-19 and protect our citizens. So, the governor was out there talking about what this is going to look like, and he kind of painted a glum picture, in my opinion. This was something where he was saying that, when you go to a restaurant now, they're going to be, wearing the face masks and probably not coming to your table. And if they do come to the table, they're going to have a conversation about what the continued service is going to look like. So this has been, it's been interesting to see. And the governor this time actually shared a little bit more information with us than he did last time. So I was happy that there was some substance. I do think it's a little bit concerning that it's like the day before the order expires, which is obviously not a good timing thing in my opinion on that. I would like to know a little bit sooner than the day before what our government is doing, because we've got a lot of people who are relying on that guidance. But if you are not familiar with our show, if you're not familiar with me, welcome to the show. It's called Watching the Watchers. Normally I do a little bit of an introduction there, but we were sort of jipping the last part of the governor's press conference. Watching the Watchers is a show that we do as a criminal defense lawyer, as a team of criminal defense individuals, lawyers and assistants and everybody involved in helping people get through their cases. We monitor police misconduct, judicial misconduct, prosecutorial misconduct. We call out the bad apples in the justice system because we have a lot of really bad people out there who are masquerading as good people. They pretend, they hide behind a badge and a gun, and they think that they're out there doing justice, or they want society to think that. But in reality, we really do have a lot of problems with our justice system from top to bottom. I've been living in it for about the last 10 years as an intern through law school and as a practicing attorney. So this is what we want to do to hold everybody in the system accountable. We've got a lot to talk about, so we've got a great show for you today. I want to do a little segment on Allister Adel, who is the Maricopa County attorney. She is the sort of the chief prosecutor for Maricopa County, which is one of the biggest counties in the entire country. So it's a big job, big responsibility. She's done some good things and she's done some bad things. So today we've got a segment called Good Allister, Bad Allister, and I'm going to run you through sort of a little bit of analysis there. Then we're going to be joined by a Maricopa County attorney candidate. His name is Will Knight. He's somebody who's running for office right now. A couple weeks ago, we had on Julie Gunnigal, who's also running for that position. And then next week, we have another candidate on. So we're kind of having an awesome opportunity to speak with everybody. It's been a lot of fun. And so we're going to ask him some questions about how he is intending to respond to, COVID-19 and sort of what his thoughts are on the whole landscape since he's running for that position. He's running to replace Allister Adel. So Will Knight is going to join us at about 4:30 in about 23 minutes. And then finally, of course, we have everybody's favorite part of the broadcast, which is the Bad Popo segment. And we're learning a little bit more about the YouTube rules and about reposting, videos and stuff. So we've actually clipped some videos from some of the most recent news stories that we've seen. I tell you this every time I come on the show, but it's really hard to sort of whittle down some of the stories we want to talk about because there are so many bad popo out there. But we've got, I think, 3 or 4 of them today that we're going to run through. And so we'll save that for the last part of the show. Now, Allister Adel. Allister Adel is the Maricopa County attorney. This is what she looks like. This is a little bit of her bio. She was appointed by the Maricopa County Attorney Board of Supervisors on October 3rd, 2019. So this was just last year. And what happened was the prior county attorney was Bill Montgomery. I made several videos about him, had a lot of issues with the way he ran that office. And then we had this little, kind of a campaign when he was in consideration to be appointed for the Supreme Court of Arizona. Defense attorneys and even a lot of prosecutors and a lot of people kind of throughout the criminal justice community had some serious issues with that. So I made some videos about it, why he shouldn't be nominated, why he shouldn't be appointed to the Supreme Court. Of course, he was, so he's there now. And when that transition happened, we had a changing of the guard, so to speak. So the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors then went forward and went through a number of different potential candidates and decided that they were going to settle on Miss Allister Adel. So I want to talk a little bit about her. Now, when that transition happened, I'm not the type of person to just try to jump to conclusions. So just because of the fact that she is a prosecutor, just because she's sort of going to be our opposition, I wanted to give her a fair shake, and I wanted to say, well, this is somebody who we don't really know. She's kind of an unknown quantity, and so how about we give her the benefit of the doubt and see what she does? And we did. We saw her come in. There was some pretty, I would say, hopeful developments that were coming out of the county attorney's office. We started to see some policies change on some types of criminal offenses that we thought were being prosecuted in an unjust manner by her predecessor, Bill Montgomery. She comes in, we start to see some movement. So there's a vehicular bureau that the Maricopa County Attorney's Office has. They handle things like, aggravated DUIs and, vehicular manslaughter cases and those types of things. There was the changing of the guard there. There was some ethical reforms that we saw going on. A prosecutor here named Juan Martinez had a lot of ethical problems in that office that seemed to have been covered up by the predecessor, by Bill Montgomery and his organization. And, that's up for debate. Of course, he's the Supreme Court judge now. So the sort of the possibility that he sees any ramifications for that are probably non-existent at this point. But that happened. So he gets up there and she comes in and we start to see some movement. Some policies are lightening up a little bit. And it's mostly quiet. We're kind of seeing new developments that are good. And now things have changed a little bit. So now it's election season. Now people are running for office. The primaries are in full swing for the Democrats. Allister Adel is a Republican, and she is now having to start, to take some stances, take some positions on things. So I want to sort of highlight good Allister and bad Allister. So when COVID-19, when the coronavirus started sweeping through the entire city, one of the things that I sort of thought was the right approach was we want less people going into the criminal justice system. So the police, on a regular basis are just citing people and sort of rounding people up and throwing them into jail, and they're letting the court system sort that out. They're letting the prosecutor's offices and the defense attorneys and the courts deal with all of that. Well, if we could, if the police are still going to do that, and I was encouraging them not to, I was encouraging them to sort of modify their policies and sort of have a tapered down enforcement, the prosecutors can also handle that as well. So they can also say, we're not going to prosecute crimes. We're going to make a voluntary decision that we're just not going to file charges. So if the police take an order or an arrest, they bring that over to the prosecutor's office. The prosecutor's office can say, you know what, we're just going to decline to prosecute that. We're going to change our policy. We're not going to prosecute marijuana crimes. We're not going to process, low-level drug offense crimes. We're going to encourage those people to go get rehabilitation or whatever. There are major policy changes that Allister, Adel, and her office can implement. And so I saw an article that came out very recently that it was very good news. It was excellent news, and it was sort of in accordance with that. So my catchphrase was, less people in, more people out. Send less people into custody, get more people out of custody. And so this article comes from the Arizona Republic. It was written by a woman named Lauren Castle, and she's got some pretty optimistic numbers here. She's got some good numbers. This was published yesterday, April 28th. She says that the county attorney's office is claiming that it's helping reduce the flow and the spread of coronavirus by reducing the number of people charged with crimes during this time, which is a good thing. That's exactly what I was sort of saying. We want less people getting charged. We want less people going in. And so Lauren actually pulled some numbers out, and I wanted to show you what they look like. So over here between March 2nd and March 3rd, we've got a total of 734 cases that were filed, but law enforcement actually turned in 897. So what we're seeing here is sort of a big, not much of a big difference between the two. You've got 734 and 897 filed, or they submitted 897, and they only charged 734. So not a huge difference between those two numbers. Well, as you can see, as this develops, there's a much, much bigger discrepancy. So by April 20th to April 24th, now what we're seeing is 840 cases were submitted by the law enforcement officers, and they only actually filed 107. So it is a much bigger difference, right? In the first one, it's over 100, about 180. On the last one, we're talking about 700 cases. The differential is very, very big. So it seems to me, right, that they're actually kind of following in accordance with that philosophy. They're filing less charges. And when you break that down over a graph and you can look at it over a certain period of time, here's what it looks like. And you can see that there's a pretty big chasm between the two. So if you plot that data into a chart, here's what it looks like. And you can see here that back in early March, there's a close sort of they were in agreement here. In other words, the prosecution office was only turning down a very small number of cases. If you recall, the national order by President Trump that we're going to go into a national lockdown or a state of emergency was right on the 13th. So shortly thereafter, we see a big dip. So this red line is the actual cases that are filed, and this blue line is what the law enforcement officials are submitting. So it's a big chasm. In other words, the prosecutor's office is just not filing charges for a large portion of those cases. Everything you see here in this gap are cases that were charged. Somebody had contact with law enforcement. They may have been stopped, arrested, cited. Who knows what happened with the case, but those charges were sent over to the county attorney's office, and they just declined to file them. So that's good news, right? Less people are being charged. As you can probably understand, my position as a defense attorney is that a lot of these crimes are just unnecessary to enforce. They're very low-level offenses. We see people arrested for just stupid things like criminal speeding and, nonsense kind of disorderly conduct cases and things like, urinating in public and all sorts of stuff that I think really shouldn't be as severe as it is. And so a lot of those people get arrested, they get booked, they get put, fingerprinted, they get, an overnight in jail. And so we're seeing a difference there. We're seeing sort of a chasm develop. Now, that's good news. But does that mean that those cases are going away? Probably not. In all reality, those cases are probably going back, and the article from Lauren says as much. So it does actually say that the county attorney has indicated that cases in which no charges are filed during the pandemic will be reviewed. and possible charges will be filed at a later time. So, of course, this is to be expected. They're sitting on hundreds, if not thousands and thousands of different criminal charges. And so those are just sitting on a desk somewhere. A lot of the prosecutors from the Maricopa County attorneys are doing what most of us are doing. We're sort of working from home, working remotely, and paring back our work a little bit. So I think that when the courts open back up, we've got an administrative order from the Arizona Supreme Court that says the court is going to actually open back up in June 1, more or less, open. Things are still going to be delayed and remote, but those cases are all going to come back. So we're going to see a massive, I think, bubble of these cases that a lot of prosecutors are going to have to work through. If you've been charged, then of course you're going to want to be cognizant of that, just because the pandemic is really throwing a wrench into normal operations. That doesn't mean that they're just going to go away forever. So, good Allister on this, in my opinion. Good Allister during the time in which we want less people going into the system. She's done the right thing. Her policies are being reflected in the numbers. We're seeing less and less people go in. Now, the converse of that is there's a lot of other people, from the ACLU, a lot of the candidates, I'm sure Will Knight, people we're going to talk to today, are, opposed to that. Obviously, they're saying she's doing the bare minimum. Really, a lot of people who are in custody should be out of custody, and I agree with that. I agree that Miss Adel has not really sort of comported with the second part of that phrase, which is more people out. So less people are going in for the time being, but a lot more people are staying in rather than being let out. We've seen some pretty big numbers from some other states where the coronavirus, COVID-19, is entering into the prisons and the jails. It's causing havoc, and I've got a graphic of that. I think we'll get there in time, but that's good, Adel. I mean, if she's not charging additional cases and bringing more people into custody or processing these, making these people come to court, that's a good thing. Now, again, the converse of that is that her hands are tied a little bit because a lot of the court proceedings, the courts are kind of shut down. So that may just be a response to the courts being closed, not necessarily anything that she's done proactively. But regardless, I want to give credit where credit's due. I mean, those numbers look good. There seems to be a dramatic reduction here. You can see that. I mean, that's a big gap. That's a big change. That's a noticeable change. It's not sort of a slow dip. It's a big chasm over this 1 week. So there was something that happened in the county attorney's office that I think trended in the right direction. So good Allister on that, which leads me to bad Allister. So bad Allister, Adel, we saw an op-ed written in the Arizona Republic, and then we saw a tweet from Allister Adel. Now, as I said, before I knew much about her, I kind of keep the hands off a little bit and see what she has to say and how she's going to approach these. And quite frankly, this is the first time I've actually seen her come out and comment on what's happening in our jails and our prisons. We know that Governor Ducey is not doing anything about it. His spokesman has said as much. We had news junkie Jimmy on from kjzz.org last week who said, yeah, they're not doing anything. They're not even answering questions. He can't get anybody on the phone anywhere. And there's a lot of problems with that. But then we've got, Allister Adel, who, as I laid out previously, is the chief prosecutor for Maricopa County. She comes out and releases this tweet. She says, political operatives are simply looking to take advantage of the fear of COVID-19 to manipulate the criminal justice system. In America, we value the rule of law, and pushing a political agenda by exploiting fear does far more harm than good. And when I read this, I was sorely disappointed. First of all, I've never been called a political operative before, but this is something I've been railing against for about the last 6 weeks, is that when this stuff does get inside the prisons and the jails, it is going to be catastrophic. And I think basically everybody agrees to that. The only people, I haven't heard anybody who disagrees with that. The people who are in charge of this stuff are just staying silent. They're not actually communicating anything. All of the journalists, everybody who's tried to reach out to them and get in contact, get some information about how many people are infected, how many people are dying, how many staff are infected. What are you doing about all this stuff? It's just dead silence. And we heard a lot about that last week. So we did hear something from Allister, and she comes out and says that basically the work that I'm doing, the work that other people are doing to the ACLU and the candidates, there's an entire movement here across the whole country. We have a criminal lawyer roundtable we talk about. People are doing compassionate release motions. I mean, these are all people who really care about getting these people out of custody, because it's a bigger issue than that. It's not about just getting people out of custody for some, I don't know what the political operatives are looking for, what the incentive is to do that. I'll tell you my incentive, that if people are in custody and they are sentenced to a 2-year sentence and they die from the coronavirus, that is an invalid social compact. That's an invalid contract that we have between the government and between the person who's been charged with a crime. We talk about this a lot. I talked about this a lot actually in my undergrad before law school. I'm a political science major. And the idea, what makes the justice system work is mutual consent. It's the governed, it's the people who are the ones who are on the receiving end of the justice system, of the courts, of the prosecutors, of the police, agreeing to enter into a contract with that government. I was watching a Netflix series called Waco, and it's a good series. It's very heavily skewed, I think, towards the Branch Davidians and David Koresh and the whole scene there. And it's not really favorable to the government or the FBI because of what happened. And so it definitely has a political bias. But in the documentary, there's an interesting scene where the FBI agent who is really advocating to go in and use force against these Branch Davidians, it says something that was very interesting. He said, look, we're outnumbered 5,000 to 1. For every police officer, for every law enforcement agency, for every single person who exists, who's in the criminal justice system, there's 5,000 other people out there who are against us. And so the only way that people, this is his perspective, the only way that people believe in the system, even though that we're completely outnumbered, or the only reason that they acquiesce to the system, is because of the force. It's because of the threat of force, because the government is so powerful. And that was sort of his argument to go in and wipe out end the stalemate over in Waco. I disagree with that assessment. I think the reason why it works is because there's this mutual understanding that people are going to engage with the criminal justice system because it is going to be just. It has some legitimacy. If people are going into custody, they believe that they're going to be cared for to a certain extent. They're going to serve their time. They're going to pay their debt. They're going to come back out and reacclimate into society, and they're going to be able to get things back in order. That's sort of the premise. There's a lot wrong with that premise, but that's in theory how it's supposed to work. Now, if that social compact is invalidated, if the government is not upholding their end of the bargain, if these people are going into custody for 2 years, for a 2-year sentence, and they catch something and they die, and this spreads through the rest of the prison system, and people are dying because they're not getting medical attention, that really undermines the legitimacy of the entire justice system. It's just, why would people engage with that anymore? What happens if people just stop going to court? What happens if they just say, you know what, I understand those are your rules and your laws, but I'm not going to court for my 1-year drug crime prison sentence. I'm just not going to do it, because I know that if I go into court, then you're going to sentence me. I'm going to go to prison. I'm going to catch the virus. I'm going to end up dead. So if you have huge numbers of people who are opting out of the criminal justice system because they fear it's illegitimate, that is catastrophic to the entire society. So when I see somebody like Allister Adel, who knows that, who knows better than this, saying that we're just trying to exploit a political agenda by exploiting fear, it's insane to me. And she says we value the rule of law and pushing a political agenda by exploiting fear. Well, we also absolutely have, we value a lot more than just the rule of law. We value liberty, we value life. And so if that is being taken away from the people who are engaging with the criminal justice system, that's a very big problem. Now, her op-ed goes on. She's got a couple points that I am not a fan of. She says here, don't let these organizations fool you. Their efforts to release prisoners is not about saving lives. It's about exploiting a public health emergency to forward a political agenda. Again, I don't know what that means. I really don't. You know, we don't have a political agenda. I would like to see some things change in the criminal justice system for sure. That's the whole basis of this program, the basis of the show. It's the basis of what we do. But when it comes to this, it's not like our perspective is, well, we're going to get a lot of people out of jail and then what? I don't know what it is, other than the fact that we are working with these people on a daily basis. We meet with people who are charged with crimes. They come to our office. They're good people. They're just like you and I, most of them. Every now and then you get somebody who's absolutely sort of willfully breaking the law and out there causing chaos and sort of wreaking havoc. But most people are fathers, mothers. They made one bad decision. They had one bad night, And what we want to do is make sure that the justice system maintains some legitimacy. Finally, she says over here at the very end, much like those who tried to profit from the first responders who needed protective equipment by price gouging in the early weeks of the pandemic, these political operatives are simply looking to take advantage of the fear of COVID-19 and manipulate the criminal justice system. Their call for action in Maricopa County is not just misleading, it's propaganda not supported by the facts. So there are a lot of facts to support what we're asking for. Less people going in, more people coming out. We're seeing what is happening around the country. There are a number of different reports and studies from different prisons. There was a case in Ohio where basically, they had 8,000 one day, and a week later they had 14,000 cases because, as you can imagine, once the virus goes into a confined space where conditions are poor, where people are basically living on top of one another, and the medical care, the medical treatment is just subpar, of course it's going to spread. Of course it's going to be problematic. We've got other articles that I'm going to try to get to. Probably won't get to them this week, but people are actually dying. There are people dying in federal custody. There are people dying in Arizona. And in one situation, there was a woman who was in there for a drug offense, who had a 2-year sentence, who was pregnant. They take her to the hospital. They do what seems like to me an emergency C-section. She dies. So now we've got a woman on a 2-year sentence for a drug offense who is now dead. We have a baby without a mother, all due to some of the problems in our criminal justice system. So there's a lot to get into on that. I know that we just got joined by Will Knight. I see him popping over on my Zoom. So why don't we head on over there? Will, we are live, and I know that we've got you here. Your camera's turned on, and let me just swap over to you, my friend. How are you doing today there, Will?
Great. How are you, Rob?
Doing real well. It's good to have you. I'm just switching a couple screens over. There we go. So
Yeah.
So first of all, thanks for being on the show. This has been kind of a fun thing for me. I know that, you're running for county attorney, and that is sort of the position that, if when you do get elected, our office is basically opposed to your office, right? We're criminal defense lawyers, and we're sort of, on opposite ends of the scales of justice. So I wanted to just thank you for coming on the program. It's great to have you.
Thank you for having me. I'm really grateful to be here. And, I've never fully subscribed to that view that it's us versus them. I think you probably agree that's part of the culture problem that we need to change about this office. Defense attorneys do just as much to defend the Constitution and to uplift our system of innocent until proven guilty. Limited government, individual liberty. So I think you and I are colleagues, and I have proudly sat at both tables. And I think the best lawyers who work in criminal justice could do that.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And, I think the most just resolutions, my office, we've handled thousands of cases. I'm sure you've done the same. The most just resolutions are when you can work with other people. You can say, look, we know your job. We know what your position is and your role in advocating for the government's position. Ours is for our clients. And if you can kind of meet in the middle, usually you can work out something very favorable. So can I just ask you to sort of give us a little bit of, that was a great answer, but can I ask you to just a little bit to kind of, give us a little bit of a background on who you are, why you're running, because this is the first time that we've met, that we've spoken. And I know a lot of my audience is not real plugged into Democratic Maricopa County Attorney primary politics. So I'd love to just kind of get an intro from you.
Sure, absolutely. So my name is Will Knight. I know it's a white boy name, but I'm actually a Latino immigrant. I was born in a city called Popayan, a little bit south of Bogota in Colombia. I'm running because I have been personally impacted by our justice system. My family narrowly escaped being held hostage by violent drug cartels in the early 80s. And then later on, when I was growing up in Georgia, I happened to be, I believe, the world's only progressive Colombian redneck, because I grew up in Georgia. But my biological father ended up getting sentenced to federal prison. My only formative memory of him was saying goodbye to him right before that happened, and we never saw each other again. So those experiences obviously had a really big impact on me. They're the reason why I ended up going to law school in the first place, why I initially wanted to be a prosecutor. And they're the reason I'm running today. 2020 is the best opportunity that we've ever had to bring real justice reform to Maricopa County. I heard you talking earlier about the appointment of my elected predecessor out of that office. That dramatically changed the landscape of this election. And with this incredible opportunity in front of us, looking at Allister Adel, some of the promises that I saw coming out of her office, I agree with you. They sounded great. But here on the back end, they're not really getting implemented the way we would like. So she's right now unopposed, messaging toward the independents and the moderates that were really upset with the way things were being done by Bill Montgomery. And she's doing that unchallenged. We had a complicated primary here, and I thought with a dynamic candidate, with an immigrant, somebody who's been touched by the justice system here in 1070 country, where we have more than 500,000 marginalized, disenfranchised voters who come from communities who are overpoliced, the Black community, the Latinx community, the Indigenous community. I thought I could come in here and help organize and motivate new voters to come to the polls, voters who weren't inspired to come in 2016, but they will come out here in 2020 to help us change the system and create a more fair, equitable, and just process.
Yeah, and I agree with you on that. You know, it was interesting. It's interesting to see sort of the dynamic change. You go from non-campaign mode to campaign mode, and so suddenly we start to see the language change pretty dramatically because, of course, like you said, you know, she's got to play to a certain base. You're running for a position that Arizona's a pretty, you know, I think it's turning more purple. You know, it was fairly red. And I think it's still pretty red in a lot of different areas. You know, maybe on national levels it's looking blue, but for local stuff it may still be red. But you know, you're running for a position where most people think, or sort of the popular idea is that, you know, you want to be tough on crime. Politicians always kind of want to be tough on crime, and so you're running for a position to be a prosecutor, and you're talking about transparency and reform and a culture change, and you know, all of these different things. How is that being received on the campaign trail?
It's being received incredibly well. So unlike some offices where there really is a stark divide between what the left wants and what the right wants, this is criminal justice. It really shouldn't be a partisan issue. It shouldn't be us versus them. It shouldn't be tough on crime. See, that's the lie that we've been sold for the last 50 or 60 years. We figured out, and Democrats and Republicans both have done this across the country. We figured out that if we pound the podium, if we say, I'm going to be tough on crime and make you feel safe, if we point the finger at marginalized groups or communities or whoever is the target of the day, then we can very easily launch successful political careers, and people can go from there to the Supreme Court, to Congress, to other positions of power. And that's the culture problem that we need to reform. Fundamentally, justice reform, the progressive activists, even Republican activists who are working for justice reform, what we want is the same thing. So when we talk about holding law enforcement accountable, when we talk about giving our communities a voice in the process, we talk about ending mass incarceration, we're also talking about fiscally responsible government. We're also talking about individual liberty and limited government. We're talking about fundamental American values, and that resonates across the aisle. We are seeing an incredible display of support, not just on the left, but also on the right.
Yeah, it's interesting, you know, and you kind of touch on a deeper kind of political, philosophical, you know, viewpoint. I've always thought it was interesting that there seems to be kind of a contradiction between the standard parties, right? You've got small government, conservative Republicans who want less government, less intrusion, more personal freedom, more liberty. That's kind of this the generic description of it. But that at the same time, they're gung-ho for law enforcement. You know, they want big prisons. They want the police rounding everybody up, you know, get those criminals and lock them up, throw away the key. And that's sort of a contradiction there. And then on the other side, you know, with the Democrats, you've got, you know, kind of more government support, more social services, more, you know, we can help the smaller people. And then they're traditionally really opposed to law enforcement. You know, you've seen movements like Black Lives Matter, the ACLUs all over, you know, prosecutors and law enforcement and all that stuff. So how do you kind of fit in that distinction? I mean, it's kind of a complicated question, but I'm just kind of curious as your philosophical viewpoint. You know, how do you kind of how do you balance out that contradiction?
So I think it is philosophical. It's fundamentally philosophical how we approach criminal justice, and departing from the tough on crime, us versus them system, returning to our core founding principles is how we do that. The right and the left are both guilty of different things, different problems, of pandering to law enforcement at times, of using fear and a tough on crime model like Allister Adel, I believe, is doing with her most recent op-ed that you're discussing, to try to persuade people that this is the only way you're going to be safe. when we look further back here, when we look before we had the tough on crime era, before the war on drugs, we approached this the way prosecutors are supposed to. So let me ask you, you're a lawyer, right? What does the prosecutor say when the prosecutor announces in court? So I'm in court, I'm the prosecutor, the judge says, counsel, please announce. And I say, good morning, Your Honor, Will Knight on behalf of
The government.
the government. And what's the government? Another word for that, if you want to be a really persuasive prosecutor in front of a jury, is the people, right?
The people, yeah.
That's your client. That's who you represent. It's the community. It's the best interests of the community.
Yeah.
So this is fundamentally about corruption too. It's about how we have corrupted the system for personal and political gain. It's about how we've been using this to advance political agendas. I get just as fed up hearing lock him up as I get fed up with hearing lock her up. We're not supposed to be using our criminal courts to solve all of society's political debates and problems. We're supposed to be using them as necessary to protect our community and to promote public safety and public health, particularly right now in the COVID pandemic. So I sometimes challenge my colleagues and allies on the left when they lose sight of that agenda. We can't usher in cultural reform. We can't usher in a prosecutorial model where we prioritize rehabilitation, re-entry, reintegration over retribution, unless we do that across the board. So holding law enforcement accountable, yes, that's important, but we also need to give law enforcement officers who make mistakes opportunities to earn our trust back and continue representing us, unless the mistake was so catastrophic that trust is irrevocably broken. Just like we need to do that for every citizen who comes into contact with the criminal justice system. The tough on crime model, all it did is create a revolving door where people are incapacitated from rejoining society, from getting jobs and contributing to the economy. And we're paying a massive, massive price for that, not just economically, but socially. And now from like a human rights perspective, it's taking a massive toll.
Yeah, there's a lot of gross stuff that we see on a daily basis. A lot of it, I think I agree with you, is culture based. I think that, we talk about the blue line that law enforcement agencies have and sort of this culture of protecting each other. And, I see a lot of cultural problems in the county attorney's office. There are many prosecutors that I've dealt with, and I think you worked there for a certain period of time, right? So you probably saw a lot of them. And I think I read in your bio somewhere that, you were at one point chided by Bill Montgomery for approaching your cases in a certain way, saying that you're being too lenient on these guys. So, that culture exists from, throughout that organization. And there are prosecutors who this is their reason for living. They get up every day and they're out there. They want to just lock people up. I've dealt with them personally and come with, big stacks of mitigation and, health problems. And he's going to lose everything. And they just go, too bad, shouldn't have broken the law. No conversation about it. Then we've got mandatory sentencing. We've got all this stuff going on. So the county attorney's office has thousands of employees, is my understanding. So how do you come into office in January, whenever I think it's January, right? And and how do you start initiating that change throughout the entire organization? Something is so big, something that is so sort of cemented in stone that this is how they're going to do things. Bill Montgomery was there for forever, So how does that process work?
So it's about focusing our attention back on the things that matter. So if we're moving away from tough on crime, from us versus them, from just charging whatever crimes that we can because they're in the Arizona revised statutes, somebody made them a felony with a mandatory minimum, so we're going to, and moving away from that and toward fundamentally what an executive officer is supposed to do, which is exercise discretion, prioritize limited resources in how we approach it. So there are specific policies that we can implement that will help that. Obviously, we need to remove from our criminal justice system a number of things that don't belong there. We shouldn't be punishing addiction. We shouldn't be punishing mental illness. We shouldn't be punishing poverty-related offenses. We damn sure shouldn't be sending people to prison for shoplifting. I swear I'm not funded by a pro-shoplifting lobby or anything like that. Shoplifting is a serious problem. I'm just saying when we're paying $25,000 per person per year, and those are the DOC's own numbers, to warehouse people and not addressing the underlying causes, we're actually paying massive amounts of tax dollars to make ourselves less safe because folks get out, the underlying causes haven't been addressed, and they can't rejoin society. So specific policies are a big part of it. Then there's cultural policies. There's helping prosecutors, those folks who've lost sight of justice, of exercising discretion, helping them see the big picture again. So some specific policies we can implement there are to require prosecutors every year, before I pay for your bar license every year, go visit a prison. We're going to give you tons of opportunities to do it, but understand exactly what you're doing, where you're sending people, and why. And I also think what we started with, the defense bar and the prosecution bar have become too adversarial. It's an adversarial system, sure, but if there is a circumstance in our adversarial system where we need to be less adversarial, it's in prosecution. We need to be working with and trusting our colleagues on the side of on the defense bar, and so we need to we shouldn't have statewide conferences where prosecutors aren't welcome and where defense attorneys aren't welcome at their conferences. And even more significantly than that, I think we should be engaging in affirmative exchange programs. I think if we have some brave prosecutors in my office who are willing to go work at the public defender's office for a year or two, our agency will absorb the cost. Go there and learn what it's like to represent somebody, to defend somebody whose crimes are motivated by desperation. For medical issues, for addiction-based issues, for poverty-related issues, and get some perspective about what it is that's motivating that conduct, then bring that culture and that perspective back to our office so that you can help address the underlying problems and be clever lawyers, right? Just because we can do something doesn't mean that we should. So we need to move away from the tough on crime culture. And then the last thing that we do is we hire well. I think cultural reform starts from the top. We set a standard where we don't marginalize people, we don't dismiss or make fun of people who are struggling, of people who find themselves wrapped up in the criminal justice system for one reason or another. And we fundamentally change how we think about cases. Instead of saying, is there a crime here? Then let's charge it. Are there priors? Then we allege them. We say, what's the harm, right? We're talking about harm reduction here. What happened to the community here? So that's cultural, that's policy approach, that's charging decisions. When we implement certain specific policies like disclosing the cost of incarceration, brilliant idea. Larry Krasner was one of the first to implement it, and it helps ground prosecutors who get too locked into that tough on crime, us versus them mentality. When you look and say, what's the offense here? So somebody shoplifted a pack of cigarettes by reaching behind the counter. We can call that a burglary, a class 4 felony, and send them to prison for it. But what's the ultimate harm here? Somebody shoplifting an $8 pack of cigarettes, right? Why should we be spending this much money on prison? Disclosing that in our filings when the judges have discretion over sentencing, I think goes a long way. But more just making the prosecutors focus on that. What's the harm? What are the results that we can achieve to mitigate that harm? And the collateral harm that certain options cause. I know personally exactly how devastating it is to a family and to a community to have somebody plucked from the home, plucked from your life, and warehoused and never seen again. So there are a lot of collateral harms that need to be considered when we figure out how to redress that harm and make us safer overall long term.
You made a great point about, I think if more and more prosecutors knew the impacts of what they were doing, that they would think about it again. When I was in law school, I was that hot-headed, young lawyer who wanted to be a prosecutor. I was in criminal law. We go through hypotheticals, and I was like, lock everybody up, man. You would read the cases, and then you'd have a group discussion with your peers, and I was the only one who was always siding with the prosecutor's office, always siding with the government. You said the people, we call them government now because it sounds better for us versus for the government. But, it's one of those things where when I was in law school, I was too young to go work at the county attorney's office. My first year, they didn't want me there. You don't have enough experience. We don't have any internship programs or anything like that. So I went and worked for the defense at a defense law firm just so that I could be a better prosecutor. I wanted to go see how these scumbag defense attorneys handled things. And I went over there and I had to start working with the clients. I had to start, interfacing with these people, and my entire perspective changed. I was able to then, have a conversation where, with these people, I had some empathy, and that changed my entire perspective. I realized that I never wanted to be on that other side. So I do think that's an interesting, prescription. And I'd be very curious as to how people respond. Have you've obviously been on the campaign trail talking about these things. Have you heard from people who are in the office who say, yeah, we that's a welcome change? What's that been like?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So most people that I know who got into law enforcement or prosecution, and again, let's not buy into the myth that reform is anti-law enforcement. What I'm talking about is just focusing on our different responsibilities. I don't think our prosecutor, our chief prosecutor, should be viewed as our top cop. Those are different functions of society. And I'm very pro law enforcement. My grandfather was a police officer, was killed in the line of duty. But most folks who get into prosecution, who are motivated to do this, are doing it for very, very good reasons, oftentimes very personal reasons, like I was. And a lot of us, like you, I had good friends who were aspiring to be public defenders. They remained my best friends throughout practice, and they're the ones that I went to when I wasn't satisfied in commercial law, when I was looking for what the next stage of my career was. But I also didn't see the light. While I appreciated that side of the coin, I didn't think that was for me. It wasn't until I experienced it for the first time, until I started taking pro bono cases from the Justice Project and seeing what it's like to treat somebody who has nobody, who has no advocate, with dignity and humanity, to understand who they are as a person. And the most surprising lesson that I learned is, while sure, we in criminal practice handle a lot of really important, really serious situations, sometimes very horrific situations. At the end of the day, all of the people we're talking about are people. There are no true monsters at their core. There are people who've done monstrous things. And we as a society need to figure out how to best respond to that. So young prosecutors get into this for very good reasons. And what crushes my heart and soul is seeing how they're being forced to march along with this 20-page policy manual that says, if this is what the background is, this is what you charge, this is the settlement proposal, this is the category. If you have to deviate down, you got to go get a supervisor's permission, all of that stuff. They're not being respected as professionals. Their discretion is not being respected, and it kills their passion. It kills their interest in comprehending justice and doing justice. And the only way that they survive is to detach from it. And that's how they get so locked in to the us versus them. This is the policy. This is the program. That's the lie that's being perpetuated. That when we say felons this or felons that, we are assumed in that is that if there's a felony, the only just result is incarceration, is prison, is serious punishment. But just as well as I do, we have felonized everything. You can indict a ham sandwich. It's a federal crime to travel interstate with a pair of dentures without getting a letter from your dentist. There's so many crimes on the books that are felonies. We talked about misdemeanors earlier. So we need to move away from conceptualizing this on a pure law and order perspective and move toward exercising our discretionary functions as executive officers. I have tons of young prosecutors that I've mentored over the years. And while I got disillusioned with that office for very good reasons, I was chastised for publishing articles on prosecutorial ethics, which I think is incredibly important. But I don't drive them away from it, because everybody's got their own journey. I encourage them to go give it a shot. If you think you can go do justice in that environment, go do justice, do your best. And what I see is a lot of folks like you and me decide to go to the other table because we feel like we can do a better job there. We can sleep more easily at night because when we win. And when we lose, justice is still done in a way. And we can talk about policy and the results of losing all day long. And a lot of work needs to be done there. But at the end of the day, I always encourage prosecutors to go there, and I want to return their passion and their discretion to them so that they can come back and do justice like they always intended to from the beginning, like I wanted to, and like you seem to have wanted to.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I mean, I for a long time have seen, it's kind of a joke amongst the defense bar. You go in and you see these prosecutors, and it looks like the soul has kind of just been sucked out of their face, and they're just miserable because that's all they're doing. They went to law school to go out there and do something, create change, and sort of, it's a passionate thing that, lawyers go there for, to change the system. That's why I did it. And when you're there just pushing papers around, and you gotta, look at a criminal charge, look at a chart, look at a criminal history, and just kind of plot where that person's going to be, you're just pushing papers at that point.
And that really kills people's passion and motivation. And think about it this way: the cost of law school is astronomical, and if folks are getting into that kind of debt, into that much extra education, they're putting aside their family and their earning potential for years to learn to be a lawyer and to have an opportunity to go work in those offices. And then they're going to go get a meager public servant salary and do justice. I mean, of course, most people are going there because they're passionate and they want to help. But when we treat our discretionary executive officers, the ones who are getting into this to do justice, to help promote public safety and to make a difference, when we strip them of that, we create bureaucrats who rubber stamp convictions. And the only way they survive psychologically is to just remove their attachment from the system. So I want to bring that back to that office. I want to bring the discretion back. I want to shred that policy manual, and I want to change the way we conceive of how we charge, why we charge, when we charge, and what the purpose of charging and prosecuting is in the first place.
You've got a debate scheduled tomorrow, right?
We do.
Yeah, and certainly, the COVID-19, the coronavirus issue is going to be a topic there. You touched on it a little bit, but let's say you're in the county attorney's position now, and we get a second wave of this thing, next year, right around the same time you take office. How do you handle that? How do you deal with that situation if we have another flare up? We kind of get this thing under control over the summer. It kind of burns itself out, as some people are hypothesizing. And now you're in office, and this thing's coming back up. Right now, we've got a lot of problems that we've been documenting on this show for a while. We've been talking about the lack of information. We have no idea how many, we have an idea how many people have it, but the numbers are changing and, within the jails and the prisons, and we don't know how much staff have it. And there's been some really bad delays. They're just not responding to reporters and journalists. So what's the county attorney's role in that? And what's your, kind of prescription for dealing with a second wave, or God forbid, another, a new type of thing like this that's really impacting our justice system?
So we've got an outstanding roadmap for what we need to be doing already. And it should be nonpartisan. It's partisan here because we have an election coming up, and Allister Adel has decided to make it partisan, which is really, really abhorrent. I think you touched on the primary things. We got to reduce the number of people who are going into our jails and prisons. They're incredibly unsanitary, unsafe environments. And the CDC recommends that as far as testing and treatment priority goes, they're ranked number 3 behind medical facilities and nursing homes, because it is such an incredible hotspot for not just the people who are there, but for our entire community, because people go in and out. We have staff and guards who go in and out of them. So we reduce the number of people going in. We got to reduce the number of people who are in there. And this is where politics is coming into play right now, where there's a shortfall in that office. We also need to be paying close attention to addressing the public health issues on the back end. So we need to be promoting safe and healthy public policies. And there's a lot that goes into all of those things. I'm happy to go into it in more detail. You talked about it a little bit. What I do want to point out specifically, though, is something you said earlier about that second prong about releasing people from custody. And this is where it's gotten political. So a lot of the people we're talking about releasing, and let's actually talk about that. Let's talk about who are these political activists that our current interim appointed county attorney is decrying right now. This is the Arizona Justice Alliance. This is the ACLU. This is the Arizona Attorneys for Criminal Justice. This is Mass Liberation. These are bipartisan efforts. Literally, Grant Woods, Terry Goddard, Andrew Pacheco, who ran for this office on the Republican side in 2004 against Andrew Thomas, and Arizona would be a much different state today if he'd won that primary. 2 chief justices, Republicans, they're signing on to these specific recommendations. And what Allister has decided she can't do, and what the governor, I guess, has decided also not to comply with, is to make themselves vulnerable to political attack by proving justice reform advocates right. A lot of the people we're talking about releasing are high risk and elderly, sure, but we're also talking about, why are we putting people convicted of drug possession in cages? Why are we keeping them in prisons when they are incredibly at risk? It's contributing to the curve. It's not flattening it, and it's making all of us less safe. If they actually do what they should be doing, and what some places are doing, including Republican strongholds, then they would be proving us right, because they would be proving that we've been spending so much money unnecessarily for a solution that doesn't help, that actually hurts. And crime rates are going to continue to plummet like they have across the country. So to the extent there is a political agenda here, can I share my screen for one quick second?
Yeah, please.
So I just want to show you this right here is a tweet from Kevin Ring. Kevin Ring is the president of FAM Foundation. It's Families Against Mandatory Minimums. They sort of branched off from the Cato Institute, a historically conservative thinking group, responding to Allister Adel saying, this is just satirical, that you're calling this politics when what you're doing is politics, absolutely rote politics. That is the premier justice reform lobby on the GOP side saying that, because that's what's going on here.
Well, I agree with that. I mean, I agree with that completely. I'm not a Democrat. I am not a liberal person. I am much more libertarian minded, but I'm much closer to a technical Republican than I am a Democrat. And my position is absolutely, this needs to be done mostly to save lives and uphold the legitimacy of our criminal justice system. I don't know, if that's a political agenda, I'll take it, I guess. But, to be called a political activist and to be called, basically the issues we're talking about, she says, don't let these organizations fool you. Their efforts to release prisoners are not about saving lives. It's about exploiting a public health emergency to forward a political agenda. And I just think that's total bullshit, man. I just can't even understand why this issue has to be politicized that way. I understand that it's Arizona's pretty red in a lot of different ways, but if it gets as bad as a lot of the other we see in other parts of the country, this is going to be a really big problem for them.
So, not only is our country struggling for a number of reasons on responding to the pandemic, but we have a problem that no other country on earth has, and that is that we are the most incarcerated country in world history. So when we're talking about hotspots, about places that the virus is going to spread rapidly and spread destructively, not just in those hotspots, but to the broader community around them, we have a problem no one else has. And it is getting played out across the country in really horrific ways. Not addressing that is a failure of leadership, a massive failure of leadership. So the activists that we're talking about, again, these are Republicans and Democrats asking for this, even here in Arizona. Yeah. But I'm like you. I vote for candidates. I'm not a big fan of party politics in general. It's a shame that this office is partisan, but it is, and we've got to do the work to get this done. But one of the most progressive, one of the most activist groups that's in this space trying to help is Mass Liberation. I'm a huge fan of theirs, but they are definitely a very progressive group, right? Let's look at specifically what they were asking for. They were asking for transparency, release of vulnerable people, safer conditions of confinement, and access to health care, and access to sufficient and affordable resources. Like personal protective equipment and sanitary resources. That's what the most progressive activists in this space are asking for. They're not saying, let's let literally every single person out of our jails and prisons with no thought to it. And that advocacy, that important advocacy that is being conducted, not just here, but across the country on a bipartisan measure, is what our county attorney is saying is political activist or a political partisan agenda.
Yeah, that's apparently, asking for the bare necessities and the basics is exploiting a public health emergency. It just doesn't make any sense. It's totally off base. It's a shame.
That's us versus them. That's the culture problem we're fighting.
It's a shame. Yeah, it's a shame, because I wasn't decided on her yet, because we hadn't seen her take a lot of these kind of hard positions. But of course, like you said, she's coming out, and now anybody who's talking about these issues is part of the activist propagandist wing of society, apparently.
I was optimistic at first. I still jumped into the race, obviously, because I thought worst case scenario, Allister wasn't going to be able to accomplish justice reform for a number of different mechanical reasons. This has been staggering. Like this recently, seeing this from her has just absolutely been staggering. But in the beginning, when she started talking about changing policy. So if somebody wants to deviate down from standard settlement policy. They don't necessarily have to go to a supervisor anymore, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's a great idea. I don't think it's going to work without cultural reform, without changing how that office conceives of how it operates and how we reward and incentivize discretionary actions and justice. The only people who are going to do that are the same ones who had the courage to ask their supervisors in the first place. But at least it was going in the right direction. So I thought, that's great. That's nice that we have a county attorney who at least understands those things. But now it's starting to look like maybe she doesn't even understand that.
Yeah, we were all sort of hoping, after the Montgomery era, that there would be something. And so we were all kind of crossing our fingers, hoping that any change would be a positive change. And it was looking that direction, but now it sounds exactly like, this is exactly like something like Bill would say. And it's just too bad. But
I've been doing appointments work on the side for many years now too. I think it's incredibly important to diversify the profession and diversify the bench. I was paying really close attention to the interim appointment process. We had an incredible candidate, by the way, Judge Maria Elena Cruz. She was unanimously passed on by the Appellate Nominating Commission, which was very recently stricken of all Democrat involvement. So it's independents and Republicans that did that. Not even that largely Republican and conservative-leaning independent body passed Justice Montgomery on unanimously. So we had a great candidate, but that went the way that it went. And after I saw this is where the appointment process was going to end up and what we were going to see out of this interim appointee, I literally quit my job so that I could jump in here and give our marginalized communities a voice, a reason to mobilize, organize, show up to the polls, and change this system in this incredible opportunity that we have. So I'm feeling it like a lot of folks right now. My wife was furloughed. We made this decision together. I quit my job. She became the breadwinner, but nobody predicted this situation. But if anything, it has made it so much more important and visceral to have good, courageous leadership in all of our elected offices, but definitely here where it has such an incredible impact on public safety, on community law enforcement relationships, and public health.
Well, I'm glad you did make that decision. It's something you've got a great perspective. I think the things that you're talking about are right on point. It's, I wish more people were having these conversations or thinking about these issues, because we as a society have an obligation to the people who are in custody. We put them there. We entered an agreement with them.
Absolutely.
They had something to do with it also, but there's a contract. There's an understanding between both of us that they've got to do something and we've got to do something. And if we drop the ball on that, that's on us, and we got to live with that. And, County Attorney Allister Adel, she's at the top right now, but you're running and others are running. And I think these issues are becoming a little bit more popular, at least more popular to think through, to think about. So you've got a debate tomorrow. How is campaigning going in light of the coronavirus quarantine situation? And
it's been an inconvenience, sure. Learning how to campaign from your living room in your pajama bottoms and a sport coat. I never knew I could be this busy in pajamas, to be honest, but it's actually going really, really well. I'm not sure if you saw, but we did really well fundraising first quarter.
I did see that. Yeah, I think you're ahead of. Yeah, I think you're rocking and rolling there. Congratulations on that.
Another important thing that we weren't messaging on heavily at that point, because we wanted to keep our eyes on the immediate goal, but we also outraised Allister Adel.
Did you?
So that is incredibly significant, considering that she's unchallenged and has the weight of the entire GOP machine behind her.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah. So, there's a lot of interest and support in this. I'm grateful for my colleagues. I want to be clear. I've got nothing against Julie Gunnigal. I've got nothing against Bob McWhorter. I really liked Tamika and Ryan when they were still in the race. I just thought we needed a different approach to this. I thought we could bring that. And I'm incredibly humbled and honored to have been a little right there, because we're building a movement. And I think that's going to be great news, not just for this that matters so dearly to me, but for all of the important elections, and franchising everybody and giving our most marginalized and impacted communities real reasons to come out to the ballot box and vote. Very, very important. So I'm excited about November.
Yeah, so am I. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to following along. Can you drop us, how can people support you? If we've got people watching the show, what can they do? Can they donate? Can they volunteer? I'll turn that to you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for asking. So my website is night2020.com. The reality of politics is that it does take money to communicate. Maricopa County is the fourth largest county in the United States of America. Running for a countywide office, even though it's down ballot, right, is basically the equivalent of running for governor or senator in Oklahoma, right?
Yeah.
You have to reach a constituency that's larger than almost all of our congressional jurisdictions, but it's down ballot. So donations are always welcome, and we're building a movement there, and I'm so grateful for all the people who have supported and are continuing to support. You can do that on our website, night2020.com. Please follow and share on social media. We're working hard with a lot of those organizations I mentioned to advocate, to demonstrate what transparent, courageous leadership would look like under a Will Knight administration. So follow us on social media and share and communicate, talk about it. That's at Will Knight 2020 on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And if you want to get involved, then we have a volunteer form on the website, or you can just email us at campaign@night2020.com. We have a growing campaign. Even in the pandemic, it's really staggering and humbling, actually, to see that people keep joining my team in really significant ways. It's because they see how important this is. So if you want to be a part of this, then let us know you're interested, and we'll be grateful to have your talent.
Awesome. Well, Will, I really appreciate you coming on the show. It was a great conversation. I love what you're doing and the things that you're talking about. And so night2020.com if you want to volunteer or get in touch. It's campaign@night2020, and that's night with a K, like a medieval knight racing into battle to reform the justice system.
I know, right? That's another fun thing. It sets me apart a little bit. It's a pretty cool ballot name, right?
It's a great name. It's a great name. It's a great domain name. I mean, that's awesome. So, well, cool, my friend. Thanks again for coming on. I'm gonna let you go, and then we're swapping over to the Bad Popo segment. So we'll be in touch. That's Will Knight, night2020.com. Thanks again, Will.
Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to watching the rest of the show.
Cool. Appreciate it. All right, everybody. So that was Will Knight from he's running for office, Maricopa County Attorney's Office in Arizona. It's a big deal. It's a big position, and as you heard him say, it's the fourth biggest county, not the fifth. So it's even bigger than I thought it was. But if you're watching it live and you have any questions for Will or anything, any thoughts on Will, why don't you drop those in the chat so that so I can get some feedback from you to see what you thought about it. So we've covered a lot today. We had good Allister, we had bad Allister, we had a conversation with Will Knight, and now what that means for us is that it's everybody's favorite part of the program, everybody's favorite part of the broadcast. It's the Bad Popo segment, and we've got some really bad popo today. We talk about this every week. We go through and we highlight the bad popo. This is what I have on the back of my wall, and these are different mugshots, different pictures, different officers, different prosecutors, people who are supposed to be enforcing justice, supposed to be preventing criminal activity, all committing criminal activity and doing things that just shouldn't be done. There's a lot of use of force problems and excessive force and some really, really bad popo out there. So why are we doing this? Why do we call them out? Because what ends up happening is these officers, they'll commit some sort of heinous violation. They'll do something wrong. There'll be videos about it, and it will all just be swept under the rug. How many times have you seen a video from an officer beating up somebody or arresting somebody or doing something ridiculous? We never hear that officer's name. We never know what department he's from. All that happens is the video goes viral. A bunch of people get angry and pissed off about it, and nothing happens to that individual. They just skate away. In the event that stuff does happen, like some of these guys here, they got fired or resigned in lieu of being fired. Then what happens is they wait a year, they wait a couple months, they move to a different state, to a different city, a different county, they get a job there, and they come back after it's all blown over. But we're not going to allow that to happen here. On Watching the Watchers, our Bad Popo segment, we want to memorialize this misconduct so that they cannot escape it, because they are bad. They're bad people masquerading as good people. We want to make sure that we hold them to account. So our first story today comes from the Rancho Cordova Police Department. I want to show you this. So this was tweeted on Twitter by Rebecca Kavanaugh, and she's the one who said that a cell phone video shows a police officer in Rancho Cordova, California, slamming a 14-year-old child's face and body into the pavement and then punching him in the head repeatedly after accusing him of smoking marijuana. This happened yesterday. So we've got that video. I want to show it to you, but before I do that, we don't know who this officer is. We don't even know what his name is. We're going to show you with the video. We're going to try to find out who it is, but a lot of this information is being released, and people are asking for this guy to be fired, and we don't even know his name. The Rancho Police Department, they released a statement. We're going to cover that too, but let's take a look at the video because this is pretty gruesome. And here we have it. The officer was, you can see him right there, and let's take a look.
Stop, bro. What's your password? What's your... Don't do this, bro. Stop, Josh, stop. Stop, bro. Stop, Josh, stop. Stop hitting him, bro. Just stop. Just stop, bro.
So you can see that there. That kid's 14 years old. 14 years old, and apparently the officer thought that he had some marijuana in his possession and went and investigated it. He decided that he was going to refuse to communicate with that officer. That officer didn't like that refusal. And so what happens is they say, well, now you're under arrest and we're just going to smash your head into the ground, even though you're 14 and you're just a kid. So you saw that there. Let's actually take a look at that one more time if I can. And I want to read you the statement from the police department itself. You can see here it says they want to put that in context. They want you to see it. They said, especially in relation to the use of force. In this case, the deputy saw what he believed to be a hand-to-hand exchange between an adult and a juvenile. As the deputy turned around, he lost sight of the adult who left the area. When the deputy approached the juvenile was uncooperative and refused to give the deputy basic identifying information. So they use this a lot. I'm going to show you a clip of another video next where we see that they arrest the person for basically refusing to identify them. So if you give them any lip, I'm not going to give you my ID, leave me alone, I'm not supposed to be stopped, they will flip, and you can see what happens here. They arrest you. You're under arrest. It's a crime to failure to provide your identification, and so that's the justification. So the police walk up to a person who's not doing anything, and they're the ones who cause the reaction. They cause the entire interaction to take place, and as soon as that person exercises a little bit of pushback, this is what happens, and it's not pretty. It's not a good.
Stop, bro. What's your password? What's your...
Don't do this, bro.
Stop,
14-year-old
Josh,
kid, full punches by
Stop,
a grown
bro.
man.
Stop,
By
Josh,
a grown
stop.
officer with a gun
Stop hitting him,
and
bro.
a badge,
Stop.
just throwing him around like a rag doll. 14 years old. A pretty gross behavior. And, I covered a story similar to this. Well, not similar to this, but the officer was very similar. This is a totally different jurisdiction. But you notice how they all look the same. Covered this last week. Another bald officer with sunglasses and a vest on arresting a woman out of a park for playing with her kids. That's what they're doing. That's what these heroes of law enforcement are doing. Let's go back to the response. As the deputy turned around, we covered that. He told the deputy he was 18, reasonable suspicion that criminal activity was occurring. They always say that. We got reasonable suspicion that criminal activity was occurring. The juvenile was resistive at this time, causing the deputy to lose control of his handcuffs several feet away, attempted to maintain control, waiting for his partners to arrive. And what do we uncover? What is the big crime? Tobacco products. So the tobacco product, a 14-year-old had a cigarette or maybe some chew. I don't know what it was, but that is the reason for his resistance, and the juvenile was cited and released to his guardians. So they just go ahead and just beat up 14-year-olds. So that officer, it's disgusting behavior, should be 100% ashamed of himself. It sounds like he probably knew that there was a camera there, because he can hear the other person recording, and he's still just beating this kid in the face and throwing him around like a rag doll. So if this officer is doing this in public, knowing he's being recorded, what's he doing when he knows he's not being recorded? What's he doing behind the scenes? What's he doing when he's transporting evidence? What's he doing in any other type of case? This is a person who thinks it's okay to sit down and beat up a 14-year-old kid who is probably about a third of his weight, punching him in the face and in the body and throwing him around, all to make an arrest for tobacco. These guys are insane. They're insane. This is insane behavior. They're acting like they're in the middle of Iraq in Fallujah or something like that when they're out there dealing with 14-year-old kids. So you know what the number is. If you haven't written it down, let's take a look again. This is the Rancho Cordova Police Department. Give them a call, 916-362-5115, 916-362-5115, and let them know that you saw the video, and just say, hey, I want to know who that officer was. I want his name, I want his badge number, and I think this is inappropriate. And you're going to be calling the police chief, and you're going to be calling some local governors or some local law enforcement. Give them a call and make your voice known. That is Bad Popo number 1. Don't know his name, but he's absolutely not a good hombre. He's a bad guy. Next story comes from Winslow, Arizona. Winslow, Arizona is a very small town. It's not big. And here's their police department. So the Winslow, Arizona Police Department actually arrested a guy who was in his own shop. So this guy's in his shop. He has an Indian goods store. He's selling products. Law enforcement comes to him. They say, hey, Winslow, there's an order in place. Somebody snitched on him. Somebody, who's got too much time on their hands and nothing else better to do with their lives said, oh my gosh, this guy's, he's got a business open and you got to call the police. The police need to come over there. So the police came over there. Apparently they warned him, you're to be closed. They leave. The guy comes. So the guy then goes and he changes the name of his store to a department store. He says, I'm no longer just an Indian, special goods store. I am somebody who sells other things. I sell essential products, essentially. So he's trying to make a pivot. He's trying to keep his business open. He's trying not to lose everything. So he says, I'm going to start selling some other things. I'm going to sell, additional products and some food and some other things. And law enforcement, they come back again. So they say he's still open. This story came from, let's see here. We've got Jim Hoft, and let's take a look at the video because it's not a good video. So let's bounce over there. Let's take a look at what happened.
Hi, man. How are you?
How are you doing?
Good.
We open today.
Absolutely.
Okay. I believe you have already been given a warning about being open, not being open.
I'm in compliance, sir.
How are you in compliance?
I went and I changed my license.
He says, I went and changed my license.
Not just a souvenir store now.
Okay.
I am a department store.
He is now a department
Indian
store.
Department store.
Changes the
I am
paperwork.
Hay. I am handling hay. I am handling paper towels, food, dog food. I'm starting. I'm getting a bunch of new stuff.
What kind of food are you handling?
What kind?
Twix, Musketeers.
Yeah.
So they're pointing out that he's got candy bars in the store.
And so I'm in compliance.
He's in compliance.
Legal, and I have a right to be in business.
Now watch this good cop, bad cop routine going on.
Getting prepared to get a big load of hay. I got hay over here. I got people
Audio's a little quiet. He says he's selling hay.
clients. Thank
He's in Winslow. It's a small town.
Okay. Can I see your license real quick?
Huh?
Can I see your license?
you. Sure.
I'm going to take a look at his license. Then he's got to get his supervisor on the phone because he has no idea what to
I don't
do.
want you to feel like we're harassing you or anything.
No, but you are.
How?
Because I already talked to the police yesterday. They talked to you about it. Did they say anything to you about it?
Yeah, that's why we're here.
Huh?
That's why we're here.
Supervisor.
Well,
It's because they told us you were reopened after you were told not to be.
no. I changed
When did
my-
this change?
Huh?
When did you get this
It
changed?
doesn't matter when I got it.
So
So
it kind of does.
it doesn't.
Okay, so now he's mouthing back to
He
them.
is trying to wave around a tax license saying he's now a department store. Issue date was 3/20.
It's the law, man. I can.
So it says issue
I can be a
3/24.
Oh, we don't know what to do.
So-
Better call somebody. Okay, now watch.
No, it's all snapped.
It's all snacks, so they get to decide.
Okay.
How's business been though?
Okay.
Overall?
It's,
That other guy says,
All right,
how's
we'll
business
get
been
that
going?
taken care
you know,
Thanks.
government's killing everything.
Okay. So,
I get 1 or 2 people a day. Corona Bologna. And look at all the people over there. Look at all the people, everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, unfortunately, you are getting a citation. I need to
I
take a
don't
picture of that. I need to take a picture of that, and I need to
Just,
write it.
it's just documentation. It'll be all right. Do
That's
you have
right.
a driver's license on you?
Now watch here. This is like I talked about, the identification.
Okay. Tell you what, go ahead and arrest him, put him in handcuffs, and then a search incident to arrest. Get your hands out of
What are you going to arrest me for?
put your hands behind your back.
So that's not-
Identify myself.
Yes.
There's it's on my thing.
No, it's not. There's
Here,
no name on it.
I'll give you my license.
No, you're already in custody.
Okay, then you guys.
Look at that.
No,
I'm going to sue you.
that's fine.
Okay,
You can go ahead and go back to the car until we're done.
I got something. I got
You can go back to the car until we're done, because right now you're in our crime scene. Back to your car until we're done. Yes, ma'am.
Well, yes, I do, because you're in.
Mr. Mazon, have a seat.
No, you guys don't have a right to touch me or even handle me.
Oh, absolutely we do. You are
No, you
under
don't.
arrest.
You guys are a violation of
If
law
I just go and show
and the Constitution.
Okay.
You're supposed to hold it.
Yes, sir. And you have keys to lock up?
Real American heroes right there, going into a guy's store who's doing everything he can to modify his business, to sell hay, to sell dog food, to sell goods and services, just like anywhere else. They come in, they say, you're supposed to be closed. He says, no, I'm not. Now, I'm now a department store, falls within the guidelines of essential services. That's the same reason Walgreens and Fry's and Safeway are open. They're selling goods. They didn't like that answer. So he's not arrested for being in violation of the essential services or the stay-at-home order. That's not the reason at all. As soon as that cop says, give me your ID, and he says, I don't have to give you my ID, boom, that's failure to provide identification to a law enforcement officer. That's a misdemeanor offense. He goes under arrest. So they caused that entire arrest. They went into his store, which is his private property. They started throwing their weight around. You've got a good cop, bad cop routine. So you've got the one good cop saying, hey man, we're not trying to harass you. Bullshit, you're not. You're in there in his store harassing him as you're telling him that. This is the dynamic between these cops. We've got one cop who they're both on the same team. They're both doing the same thing. As soon as the supervising police officer says, make the arrest, Mr. Good Cop drops everything, follows orders very dutifully, puts his hands behind his back, and arrests that guy. That's what our law enforcement is doing. That's what they stand up every day and they say, man, we're out there. We're on the streets. We're fighting it. Every day is a struggle. Everything's a battle. They're out there arresting law-abiding business owners in Winslow, Arizona. Absolutely disgusting behavior. I don't know the names of those cops, but we're going to be looking into it. See, this is the thing that they do. They don't want any personal responsibility. They don't want to identify the names of those cops. They never do it. We can never find their names. Let's get their file photographs. Where are those posted? How many times has this happened before? How many times are they arresting people for these things? We don't know because they don't tell us. There's no transparency. Will Knight was just on. He was talking a lot about transparency. If these cops were held personally accountable for this type of nonsense, maybe their behavior would change. Maybe the culture would change. But nobody's going to call these guys out. Nobody's going to be at their homes protesting. They're not going to get a one-star review on Yelp. They're not going to get dinged. They're not going to have any repercussions in their professional career. So why not just keep doing this stuff? There's no disincentive to do that. So that's out of Winslow. We know where that's at. And it's not good. Let me pull up their phone number just one more time for you. So give them a call and tell them you're disappointed with their officers. You think Mr. Mason should be released. I'm going to guess the charges are going to get dropped anyway. A prosecutor is going to look at this and say this is nonsense. 928-289-2431. 928-289-2431. That's in Arizona. That's in our backyard. And it's not good. Not good. Those guys are both very, very bad popo. And we hope that we can find their names and hold them accountable because they're going to go up on the wall. All right, let's look at another set of officers. These people come from Wisconsin. So you're going to see again, watch the aggression, watch the body language of these cops, especially when you as a citizen push back a little bit. Watch what happens. So in this next video, what we're seeing is a pair of Wisconsin police officers. They show up to a woman's house. They've got a stay-at-home order, much like the rest of the country. They show up and they say, yeah, we got notice that your kid was over at the neighbor's house and they were playing. So obviously that is pretty egregious criminal behavior. And we're going to need to show up and we're going to tell you that you need to keep your kid at home because, two consenting adults, two parents can't understand that they're healthy and that their kids aren't infected and that they're doing quarantine according to their own adult standards. They know how to quarantine themselves. So they're saying, you're doing you, we're doing us. Hey, our kids can play together because we're exercising all of these other precautions. I think that they're capable of doing that. I don't think that they're dumb enough to not understand how to take care of themselves. So it's a good thing that law enforcement came and set them straight. Now, when they come, watch the body language, watch the tension, watch when this woman pushes back and say, tell me the law. Tell me, what justifies this behavior. Watch what the female officer does. They don't know what to do. Their heads just kind of explode. That's why in the first officer, on the last video, he's calling his department. He has no idea what to do because these guys, when you break the script with them, something short circuits up there. So let's take a look at this next video.
Hi, Amy.
Hi.
I'm Deputy Everhart with the Sheriff's Department. So, are you aware that we're in a stay-at-home order right now?
Yeah, obviously.
By the government?
Yes, I am aware.
Okay, you're aware of that?
I am aware.
So I don't need to explain that to you?
No, you don't need to explain that to me.
I can if you need me to.
Go. You can because your officer was just here 2 weeks ago.
Okay, do you need me
and
to explain
he explained it to me that you guys weren't enforcing that order.
Oh, we're about to.
Okay.
So you understand it though?
Okay, so why are you here?
Because your daughter is going to play at other people's home and you're allowing it to happen.
Oh, wow.
They were over here as well. So
Okay.
are you
And
here?
They've been talked to about it. So
No,
now
I
I'm talking to
understand.
you,
Okay.
and so either you can acknowledge it or you can argue.
I'm acknowledging it.
Okay, stop having your kid go by other people's home.
Okay, I acknowledged it. Anything else?
Nope, that was it. Apparently, there was some other
I
issue
acknowledged it.
before
I acknowledged
Okay,
it.
good.
Anything
Thank you.
else?
Yeah, I need your last name. Amy, what's your last name?
I'm not. Is there a reason you're asking for
I'm
it?
adding you to the screen so we can document that we.
Okay, watch your face. Here it
Is
comes.
there a reason for it?
Short circuit.
You're violating
that's
a
what I'm
state order,
talking
which is
about. If you let me finish, that's what I'm explaining to you. Because you're violating an order.
I haven't violated an order.
We're gonna have documentation in our screen with your name because we're here talking to you about that you said you just acknowledged.
Okay.
So then there's documentation.
I would like to
of
see
who
the
we
law
spoke
that
to.
requires me to give you that information.
Short circuit. There it is.
Thank you.
There it is.
Because I haven't.
What is your middle initial?
Oh.
I don't believe that I'm required to give
Oh,
that to you.
man.
Are
Away
we
from the
done
host.
here?
No, we're not.
Okay.
Are we done
Middle
here? No,
initial
we're
and
not.
your last name.
I'm not giving it to you. I haven't done anything wrong.
Okay. Perfect. We got it.
We
Okay.
already got it.
And that'll
So
be documented too that you're uncooperative.
Okay.
we documented. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. We documented that you're uncooperative. Uh-oh. That is good documentation. Really stellar job to these two American heroes showing up on a woman's private property. You can see their cars are right in her driveway. They just roll right in and they just say, hey, you're not parenting your kid the way that we think you should parent your kid. They're being extremely condescending. Do you need me to explain the order to you again? Do you need me to tell you this? You're too stupid to understand the law. So we're going to come tell it to you. We're going to have a show of force. We're going to have two different people come to your private property and tell you how to raise your children. And then when they start asking her for stuff that, I don't know what state she's in, Wisconsin, I don't know what the laws are there, whether she's required to give them information or what the specific rules are about her being in her home and on private property. But she stands her ground and she says, I'm not giving you anything. She was very reserved, actually, but she did a great job. She stood up for herself and said, I'm not giving you anything. Now, in Arizona, they probably would have tased you and arrested you for that. So, thankfully that didn't happen to her here, but the officer then short circuits. You can see her brain. There's like a moment in that video where she just doesn't know how to respond to it because she's getting some pushback from somebody. And they're so used to people just cowering to law enforcement authority that anytime somebody kind of changes or jumps off script a little bit, they don't know how to handle it. So you heard the audio is kind of low, but you heard the other officer say, look, we already have her last name. Let's just get out of here, because they realize that this lady is actually, exercising some of her rights. Why are they on her private property? I'm sure they're there without a warrant. She's letting her kid play with the neighbor's kid. This is America. This is America. This is what our law enforcement is doing. Now, a lot of people, support that. It's insane to me, but somebody had to have called the police on this woman. Probably another neighbor who saw the kids running through the yards or something and called the police and brought him back out there. I mean, it's just It's lunacy to me. Good for this woman for standing up. A lot of the time, these situations, they do not go this well. They just do not. If you are threatening or basically, being uncooperative, they're going to arrest you. They're going to tase you. We see a lot of those stories. They may even kill you for that, for not communicating with them, for being uncooperative. So that, that officer, that American hero over there is going to document her file. We're going to note your file. You're being uncooperative. Okay, go ahead and do that. Go back out there and stop other kids playing with the neighbors. I'm sure that that's what they've signed up for. That's why they are officers, just doing really good police work. Stellar job to both of those just true heroes out there fighting for justice and protecting all of us by keeping kids from the neighbor's house. So again, we don't know who these officers are. Why don't we know who they are? Why not? Because they all hide behind the badge. They all hide behind the gun. It's a shame. It's a shame. But both of those officers, bad popo. You're both very bad popo. And, this video is going to be memorialized there on YouTube there. So hopefully you guys, think a little bit about what you're doing and why you're doing it. We understand there's an order. We understand there are laws in place. But that interaction is not good. It's a bad popo situation going on. All right. Last but not least, don't have a video on this one. This guy, horrendous, not even funny, not even anything to joke about. But this type of stuff also gets swept under the rug. So this officer he's a Lake County deputy. His name is Jose Rodriguez. Here's what he looked like. Here's his mugshot. So this is a pretty gruesome allegation here. He is arrested for soliciting underage teenage girls to make porn videos for money. The girls range from 16 to 17 years old. He's still under investigation. He's booked at the Lake County Jail with a $60,000 bond. He was suspended during the investigation and is pending termination. So seems like we're getting some good movement from that particular department if they're going to let him go. Crimes like this are usually fatal to an officer's career. Fortunately, when these guys go to prison for a very long time, solicitation of a minor, that is a good thing. They go away for a long time, as they should. The problem here, why was this guy on the force to begin with? Why are these officers? There are hundreds of them. I told you at the beginning of the show, every week when we're doing show prep here, it's like a never-ending supply of bad popo from all over the country. This one was a bad one. Obviously, soliciting minors to make pornography, girls who are 16 and 17 years old, is not a good thing to be doing. Pretty disgusting behavior, really gross allegations. But he was on the force, and who knows how long he was on the force for. And if this guy is inclined to go and break the law and solicit 16 to 17-year-old girls to make pornography, how many other cases was he doing disgusting things on? How many people was he citing for traffic tickets or arresting for DUIs or arresting for domestic violence when he's an authority figure? All the meanwhile, he's out there committing the most heinous of crimes. We see this a lot with different officers. There's a massive difference, double standard there. These guys sort of operate under the color of law with a certain sense of immunity because they know that they're in the good old boys club. They know they can get away with this stuff, and so they just continue to do it. So once again, Jose Rodriguez, he was a Lake County deputy. I don't know how long he was on the force, but he has been arrested. He is in custody, and hopefully he's off the force. So another very, very bad popo, but it sounds like he's going to go away. Now the others, they're just going to be out there again. Those cops out of Winslow, those cops out of Wisconsin, the cops everywhere doing this stuff. We see it all over the place, arresting people for spending time with their family, arresting people going to church, arresting people at parks. It's getting pretty bad. It's getting pretty gross. And so we're just going to continue to do our job here. We're going to keep calling out the bad popo, the bad prosecutors, the bad politicians, the bad judges, anybody involved in the criminal justice system. They're going to get called out because that's what we're doing here on Watching the Watchers. This is very important stuff. Our justice system is sort of on the rocks in a lot of ways. We talked a lot about some serious issues that are going on. People are losing faith in law enforcement. They're losing faith in the justice system. And so with some transparency, with some accountability, with some news, with some sharing, with some spreading of the information, maybe we can change the culture. Maybe we can create some awareness. We've got elections coming up across the country. Maybe it's a good time that we all start talking about criminal justice reform. That's what we're doing here on Watching the Watchers. Please do me a favor, subscribe to this channel if you're not already subscribed to it. YouTube is our home base. If you're watching on Facebook, YouTube is our home base. Go over to rrlaw.tv, put that into your web browser, hit the subscribe button. We're going to keep doing this show. If you've got ideas on other stories to share, please send them my way on Twitter is probably the best place to do that. I'm at Robert Gruler ESQ. That's short for Esquire. Robert Gruler ESQ, at Robert Gruler ESQ is my Twitter handle. And then, of course, if you have a criminal charge in Arizona that we can help with, we have a lot of experience in all the different courts in Arizona. Go to our website, rrlawaz.com, and schedule a free case evaluation. But if nothing else, we'll see you next week. This was another episode live of Watching the Watchers. Really appreciate you being here today. Have a wonderful rest of your week, and we'll see you next week. Take care.